Okay, episode 6, hashtag cancelconor. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been several years.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, I know you were, I imagine you were here partly because of you were doing schooling and stuff last I heard.
Yeah, I actually, I just finished my program in
Nice.
April, so that's pretty cool. Graduated during COVID times.
Oh, well I guess ceremony probably sucked then, but...
I ended up actually not doing the ceremony thing.
Okay.
Yeah, their convocation, it was like, you had to pay to be in it. And, you know, if it was just, okay, we're going on the stage and we're getting all the pictures, that'd be one thing. But they said it was going to be like a drive-through thing. So, you know, they'd have a screen and call up names and people would drive their car past and then pick up their parchment. And I'm like,
Can I pass?
I don't get to, be with any of my classmates or anything. I was like, So I held off, and then I was thinking about maybe I should do it anyways. And I realized my time to submit to be in the convocation was, like, I was late for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I emailed them, and they're like, no. So, yeah, it is what it is. I'm actually not too torn up about it, though, because,
Yeah, well, especially you have to pay extra just to do the ceremony for your schooling, and it's that seems odd, but
Right.
I don't know. I guess to each their own.
I know a lot of them are still on like the Facebook MRU Ed groups and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that sometime when it's safe to do so, we'll probably have like a gather for the class.
Yeah. I suppose there's going to be each their own little cliques of people that actually want to hang out with each other anyways, so.
That's true, yeah. I made friends, but not quite the same as when you just finish high school and you come in to college or university. And
Well, you want to be able to move the tassel to the side and then throw it in the air, and then it freeze frames there, and whatever that 80s song starts playing.
Right? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was one of the oldest people in pretty much every class I was in. So.
Oh, I guess. Well, it's funny too, yeah, because you imagine 10 years being actually kind of a big difference when it comes to post-secondary. So.
Yeah.
Because you are, I'm thinking, 37?
Yeah, you're right. It's funny because I actually probably wouldn't even think what age I am unless somebody has said it recently, and I'm like, oh yes, do math.
Wait.
Math is correct. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I was born in. I actually had to do that when I was 37. It's like, am I 36 or 37 this year? You just stop celebrating your birthday. You just doesn't really matter anymore after a while.
Yeah,
So.
well, and especially with kids, like it's not about you anymore. It's their, mom's birthday thing, and that's it's totally fine. I probably would have gotten up and been like, oh yeah, it's my birthday, and that'd be about as much as I thought about it.
But you were taking, if I recall, child psychology?
Oh, I was in that before. So, I started off in a Bachelor of Arts, doing my, my major. I actually had a double major in psychology and English.
No big deal.
Well, I was about halfway through, and I was having a hard time sticking with it because I had to withdraw with cause a few times. I just, as a parent, especially with little babies, it was hard to manage, and with a partner that was not supportive in it.
Yeah.
In fact, downright sabotaging in some cases, that it became this isn't going great, so I took a break, and when I was coming back, I could have tried to get into the same program, but I thought, okay, well, psychology, you need to have at least a master's to be able to work in Alberta, in counseling or anything like that.
Yeah.
And anywhere else outside Alberta, you need a doctorate. So I was thinking, okay, well, this is taking me forever. Taking the minimum of 3 courses and then dropping a course partway through, so 2 courses at a time was going to take so long. And I was roughly about halfway through, but it had been a good chunk of years. So I shifted my focus. I applied to the education program and the nursing program.
Okay.
Nursing, they actually said that I needed another science, grade 12 science. And I'm like, what do you mean? I have like 3 grade 12 sciences.
How many do you need?
But they were like, no, you need like a general science grade 12. I'm like, well, BC didn't have that. We didn't have general science in grade 12.
Specific science like physics and chemistry and
so
biology.
I had psychology and biology and natural sciences. I'm like, but you need like another. So they had said, well, you could like, you could do a. I did get into the education program, and I finished that for teaching. So.
Okay, so you can actually do more of a kind of teaching, leading sort of role in a high school, or how does that work?
So Mount Royal, if you take the education program, your automatic major is in elementary, because that's what they focus on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I could teach in any level, but my experience is all related to elementary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That actually makes a lot of sense, because I remember you talking about that years ago when you were, well, before you'd even gotten into school for any of it, that it makes sense. I mean, you're helping set and guide the basic principle of what a person becomes. I mean, it always changes after a certain amount of time anyways, but there are, well, after being through enough relationships and other sort of thing too, you understand like how important that a lot of that stuff really is, because there's a lot of that, well, fight or flight things that are just constantly active if that's how you're raised.
Yeah.
And you don't realize what that is or where it comes from until you get to a certain age, and you're like, oh, how deep do I have to dig to actually work on some of these things now?
Right? Yeah. I think one of the things that had been really great with MRU is they've got such a big focus on like the relationships that you develop. And I know other programs when you're going into teaching do as well, but it was such a big part of Mount Royal's focus in their programs. I think that some people came into the program kind of with that perception of, like all the chairs in a row and, like you talk and people write, and that's kind of the teaching role.
Yeah.
And obviously that didn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't work for a lot of people. So the focus on, building those relationships and understanding where your students are coming from, and trying to meet their needs, even though each person might have a different need for how they learn. Mm-hmm. It's certainly more complex, but it's not out of the range of like what is manageable for teaching, right? And I think that it makes it a lot better. Who wants to stand there and talk for hours and just hope people took notes or understood?
Well, it depends on how arrogant they are, I guess.
Well, I suppose, even if you really like to hear yourself talk or whatever. I mean, if you have your students leave and they're just like, oh, I hate this class, or, my teacher doesn't even know my name, or any of that, I can't imagine that makes you feel good at the end of the day, right? No,
well, then if your students are failing constantly, it's after a while, if there's like a really bad turnout, you got to think it's like, well, maybe it's not them. They can't all be dumb. Like
totally. I had one class that I actually dropped right away. It was supposed to be like a biology course. I don't remember the professor's name, and I probably wouldn't say it if I did. But they must have had tenure, because they started off the course saying, look around the room, about 3 of you will pass this course. And I was like, wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's the exit?
Right? I was like, this is not how I learn, to be competing to be the top. And if you're not the top, you don't pass. That's awful. It was I stuck around, I think, the first week. And there was a lot of quizzes, and it was a lot of like the gotcha kind of quizzes.
Oh.
Whereas, like, how much can I make it difficult for you?
Instead of actually trying to teach you something.
Yeah.
I understand, exactly. Yeah, there's benefit to some level of challenge and and stuff, but it shouldn't be a fight to gain knowledge.
Right? And I'm a competitive person, but I don't appreciate the elitism in academics that a lot of, I think a lot of people kind of hold, whether they think about academics that way or they've gone into courses and they've had this kind of situation with professors like that. Mm-hmm. It kind of indicates like you have to be at this level, and if you're not at this level, then you're not smart. And if you're not smart, it's not worth my time or effort to teach you. You know? And I think, everybody has different smarts. You know, there are areas Absolutely. Where they're like, I totally get this, and areas where they don't. And all you need is, somebody to be like, oh, you need to hear it this way. Well, let me explain it to you like this, and then get it. You know, information is accessible. It should always be accessible. And to make it elite, it just makes me really...
When you're already paying, partly just paying their wage for one, but you're paying enough to be here. So you're already showing enough commitment that you're trying to make a go of this. And do what you can to try to stay focused in this. Because, you've already done 12, 13 years of school, and you're by choice going back for more,
right? Which
a lot of people don't do. So, not to say that everybody has to be coddled or something necessarily either, but the same token, it's kind of an interesting way that they right out of the gate challenge you in a way that doesn't seem beneficial for really anybody.
Right. Yeah, and I like school in a sense. Like I really enjoy learning. I love learning. I don't like the that kind of push of like you have to be up here.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of ways that assessment happen in academics that I don't appreciate.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you're doing a 2-hour exam, it's like snap, snap, snap. What's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? That might not really be a good reflection of my understanding of a topic. There are plenty of people that get like test anxiety, and I don't know if it's necessarily that. I think it's just like my ADD kind of goes haywire because I'm like, oh, I need to do this. What do I focus on? Okay, usually you should read the whole thing first, because if it says at the end, only do every other, right? Then you get caught and you did everything. Well, don't do that. So I got to focus. Okay, so I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to come back, and then, oh, what was that? Okay, I'm going to read that again. And then by the time I'm ready to actually write my exam, I've wasted so much time. And at that point, then you start to panic, and then you're like, oh, I forgot everything, So...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and some people just are simply not made for quick fire pressures or things like that. Some people thrive on that, and they do spectacular. But I know there's things that I'm not completely confident at where I'd rather take my time and do it correctly. Mm-hmm. But there's also certain things where, say, I can just fly into it and I have no problem taking care of. But they're very different things. Well,
exactly. And you might have one day where you're like, yeah, okay, I could do that really quick. And another day where you're just not 100% on, right?
Yeah.
You need a bit more time. And I feel like the standards of testing, it's shifting in the elementary schools and whatnot. But I think that there needs to be a shift overall. You want to show that you actually understand something, and doing it in a test where it's that crunch, it's not going to capture everybody's learning in the same way and really, really show it. You know what I mean?
Well, not only that, when it comes to something that, like what you're doing, they're telling you what the books are saying and a certain amount of it, but it's like, well, you're working with children, though, small children. Mm-hmm. Is there any level of actual teaching for small children? Because they're not like grown people. Like, they have a very different way of seeing the world.
Yeah, well, and there's lots of ways to do assessment, and that's one of the things that I've been learning a lot about making sure that there's a lot of documentation, a lot of formative assessment. Like, that's like where you're not testing per se. You might give like a little thing and be like, how did you do? But it's like a show what you know kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that really is less about here's what I'm going to put in marks for a grade. It's more about where do we need to focus? Where is this student? What do I need to do to make sure that everybody really gets it? And, there's like projects, presentations, etc. There's so many ways to show, You don't see that sort of thing in the university classes very much.
Yeah, I wondered about that because the thing is too, is like, it took me until I was in my 30s before I started delving into a lot of the stuff that I was trying to run from, or, well, then like I've said before, like drink or smoke away sort of thing like that, and it's not how you deal with things.
Right.
So if you can give them some level of understanding or the freedom to be vulnerable and be, make it a good space for people to talk and stuff, especially when you're children.
I feel like
Huge.
social spaces take up a lot of the brunt of our healthcare in Canada. Like things like school, social activities, those are our healthcare in a lot of ways. We don't have a good healthcare program as far as mental health.
Yeah.
Because it's not very accessible.
No, and I get that in the sense where they're trying to get people into sports or group activities, and that is good in its own thing because, none of us lives alone, especially living in a city. Mm-hmm. Like, we all have some level of interconnection, doesn't matter how introverted you are. People bring food to the stores. You have to go to the store. You have to talk to a cashier once in a while. But with that said, though, too, I know not everybody can afford to get into sports or after-school activities or certain projects that cost a few extra dollars. So yeah, like you're saying, there should be more generalized way of educating our youth. I think it's hugely important. They are the future, as we all keep saying and hearing.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of therapy comes through in the sense of it's not actual therapy going to meet a counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. A lot of therapy happens in social groups, in schools, in play groups, etc., where people talk through whatever it is that's hard for them. Mm-hmm. Without those kind of supports, people really, it's hard. We're not doing very well for mental health care in Canada,
Well, and we're still fighting a lot of old stigmas and stuff too. As it is now, because there's been such an overcorrection of men being blamed for everything, and I'm not saying that we don't deserve a big portion of it, but there's also a lack of care for men because of it, and boys and stuff too, because there's still that whole be a man or suck it up or whatever, and there's
and that's a toxic view of masculinity, and I don't know that it's necessarily to say that men are to blame. I know that there are views mm-hmm. that kind of center around being, men, but it's the systems that have been put in place. So we have a fairly patriarchal system. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's not necessarily because you or him or somebody over there that are male are the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all of us have problems because of that. Yeah. For yourself, having that kind of stigma of, you're not very manly if you have mental health issues and you talk about it. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. And that is also stemming from this patriarchal, toxic view of what masculinity is supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't put that on a gender. I put that on the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. It's because everybody's like toxic masculinity, and men in general are kind of all swept up in that. And it's like, no, toxic view of masculinity. Way better way of saying it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Certainly some people are toxic in their masculinity, but that's only one expression. You know what I mean? There are certainly being this view of masculinity supposedly being this very stoic, kind of strong, don't talk, don't tell kind of thing.
Yeah.
it benefits no one.
No.
You know?
Creates a lot of problems down the road.
It does. Yeah.
That's always, well, I would imagine kind of exactly the type of thing that you're looking to delve into, where we can kind of have a leveled playing field. And, well, something as simple as girls getting shot on because they lose some game, video game, chess game, whatever sort of thing like that, or they win one over a guy, but a guy's like, oh, well, I don't want to lose to a girl, so I'll physically hurt you because I'm stronger than you are. You know, and there's definitely going to be some of that. I mean, to a degree, kids are kids. But at the same time, though, too, there's a lot of the idea that that's not acceptable, and I think we all know that, for one. But for two, that there's ways that women are way stronger than men. And that's taking time to kind of everybody to get on the same page as that. I mean... Well,
and that's because we're socialized into those roles. We're socialized into, like, emotional caretakers.
Yeah.
Not just physical caretakers, but emotional caretakers.
Yeah.
It is something that is like a social expectation of women to be more communicative than men. Men aren't supposed to be communicative. Women are supposed to be. But then what happens when somebody is having an issue and you need to be able to bridge that gap between two people? Mm-hmm. Then it becomes like that emotional, mental load is handed off to, female gendered people, typically.
Yeah.
And that's also just part of the system, which is, not good.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I mean, how many people have hairdressers or something that are just as much their psychologist as somebody that they actually go to for mental health?
Right. So I hear you saying that in some ways women are so much stronger, but it's another view of,
well, in certain ways. I mean, you guys make all the people. So
that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. But
well, in the whole, I mean, I remember listening to it was a TED Talk about that, and how this woman used to be a feminist, and talking to a construction worker, and he's like, look outside, everything you see was made by men. And what she heard was that women can't do that. It's not what he said, though. It's like, guaranteed 99% of everything that's around here is made by men. Sure, there's a couple women that showed up and did some work too. And it's not to say that it's a bad thing necessarily. But I mean, again, typically men are known for destruction, not creation. Well, look at all the structures that we have. Most of that was built by men. And it's not to put women down, it's just this is part of our role.
Well, so, I mean, yes, but part of that is perpetuated by this. I remember plenty of times where I had applied to, I think I talked to you about this a bunch of times, right? Yeah. Applied to do things like roofing, construction type things. Certainly was fit enough to be able to do it at the time. Mm-hmm. But, I was like tiny. And I got laughed out the door. And I was like, this is crap.
Yeah.
Like, why are you laughing at me? I'm certainly as capable as that other person. Well, look how big that guy is. And I'm like, okay, but how much? He looks like he's struggling to lift a 30-pound bucket. Okay? Like, I'm sorry, but I could carry 3 of those buckets. So why are you not hiring me? It's a physical assessment just by looking at somebody in that judgment.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of women don't go into these sort of job roles because of that stigma, where it's like, I'm not going to hire you. You're little. You have breasts. You have hormones. And I'm like, everybody has hormones. But it's like seen as this diminutive kind of thing. Like, you cannot, you're small. You can't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's that. And then women that do break out into these roles and say, I'm just as strong. Maybe they're bigger physically, or they're kind of like a butch persona, and it's seen like, oh yeah, you're acceptable, you can come and join us. But there's still a lot of issues that people that work in male-centric roles take a lot of flack from their coworkers, from their bosses, etc. They have to work twice as hard, you know what?
And get half the credit.
Yeah, exactly. To prove themselves. And it's like, well, you know, that guy graduated out of high school, took this job with barely any education, can't even do half the work, and they're getting promotion because why, right? Because he's got a sweet beard. Like,
yeah. No, it's very true.
I have beard envy. Like,
yeah, I get that. But well, not only that. I mean, there's also a level of the other stigma that we can't have a woman on site because they create problems. It's the woman that's doing it. It's not all the guys that are being dicks about everything. Right. And, you know, forcing her to be the problem.
Yeah. Well, when somebody says, like, a really sexist joke and they're like, "This it's funny, come on." And you're like, "What? I actually didn't find it funny, so I think there's something wrong with your joke." Yeah. You know? And you're like, "It's just a joke. You don't get it. You don't have humor." And you're like,
inaccurate.
Perhaps. Maybe you should think about your audience, right? Yeah. And those sort of things, that can be the problem when somebody's like, "You know what? I really don't like it when you guys are making sexist jokes all the time." Or, you know...
Intentionally do it because there's a woman there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, keep going. That one died for some reason. So.
Oh, okay.
But I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, that's... it's a ridiculous problem that doesn't seem to ever change or go away. And I don't really know why, because it's not like they're being impressive.
Well, I think that the younger generation does seem to be doing a lot better. But it's these systems that are all already in place and nobody's torn them down yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We all operate within a crappy system just because it is the system. And we don't have, you know, the personal power to change it.
I can do this.
Are you sure?
No. Is there another plug in this wall? Son of a...
Does this one have the lock thing? You just slide it.
No. It's got to be smarter than it. I am not.
Well, or just have some operational know-how. I mean, I've used these ones before, so...
Or, you know, don't be afraid to ask a woman for help.
Fair.
Exactly what we were just talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I think the younger generation is doing a lot better in that sense. They're a lot more comfortable talking about their identity. They're a lot more comfortable stepping out of gendered roles. In that case, it's not just about, oh, this is my gender. It's about, well, I don't see why I'm expected to be this just because of the body I was born in. I don't want to take this on. I want to take on who I am fully without restrictions. That's stupid.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot more of as, you know, our kids' generation are getting older, but they're gonna have to push out the people with those stagnant mindsets, right? And even our generation, we haven't been able to do that yet.
No, when we're working on changing it and understanding the problem is part of it, for sure. But
I was saying that they used to be a feminist. I'm like, I'm always surprised when somebody says they're not.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
What? Yeah, I mean, there's some people that are... Well, I think she was just more even about her opinion, and she was the man-hating type feminist before.
Okay.
So, not to prop women up sort of thing. And I think actually that's been a big part of this, whatever, third or fourth wave feminism, that it's not about equality, it's about women taking over, which is totally fine. If they want to, go ahead. I would love to see more women in power, like especially in like higher parts of politics, because, well, like I said before, I mean, men are usually good at destroying things. So let's get women in there to do it if they want to build something. But they may also see that it's not as easy a job as they think it is.
Well, and certainly that's, again, a socialized role.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know that I'd agree that it's... I don't know if we're in fourth wave, fifth wave. That's debatable, right?
Yeah.
At this point, but I don't know that it's really so much a push to have women take over, per se.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more about representation, equal access to equal voices.
Yeah.
Right? And intersectionality is a really big part of it. Yeah. Because everybody is going to have different experiences, lived experiences based on all the different parts of who they are in society, you know?
No, I agree with that. I think part of it is because people talk like about the gender pay gap or women in roles of power, like CEOs or whatever sort of thing. But part of that is because they don't necessarily want to have certain type of roles because, like you said, like they're a lot more the caregivers and stuff a lot of the time, which honestly I think nursing definitely needs to get more funding for one. But the other part of it is too is that it has to be something that's functional, I think, for everybody. Because, I mean, well, I know Jordan Peterson made the point because it was exactly that kind of thinking that it's like, well, if we want more people in positions of part or more representation in power and stuff like that, say, okay, well, what about bricklayers? You want 50% of bricklayers to be female? And the woman he was talking to about it's like, well, I don't care about that. Like, well, exactly my point then. So, which is fine. I mean, again, if it's a role that needs to be filled by a certain person or people that want to do the work, it's one thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that should be, well, somewhat to your point is
I don't agree with pushing for like a certain higher rate based on diversity unless there is. When there becomes scrutiny, it's usually because people want in those roles and they're being denied.
Yeah.
Like you said, well, what about hiring 50% of people to be women that are bricklayers? Well, how many women are chomping at the bit to be a bricklayer? I don't know how many men are chomping at the bit to be a bricklayer. It's not like a, like a role of a lifetime. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh my God, you're a bricklayer. What? That's so cool. Maybe for like a few people out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the issue. I think it's when you're looking at, companies that are doing internal hiring and only men are getting promotions. It's, issues like companies that hold power and how many companies that hold power have CEOs that are women. And it's not that it's wrong that there are men that are CEOs. The problem is where there's a huge imbalance. And people want those roles and they're being denied it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that there should be like, well, okay, so how many people do we have on staff? Okay, so we got like 2 black people and we've got 2 Asian people. And like, it shouldn't be a count.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a disservice.
Yeah, well, it should be hired for the ability to do the job. And that actually kind of brings me to something I've been wanting to talk to somebody about sort of thing too, like the whole idea of minority. Like the idea or the definition of majority is like more than 50% of things. So, and it's not to say that people aren't people. Like I think everybody's a person and deserves an opportunity to do things, but living in Canada, a lot of people are white here, so there's going to be more white people doing things.
Well, I mean, I suppose. Here's the thing, though. I feel like there has been a shift in the last 10 years where white isn't the majority necessarily anymore in all spaces. Maybe, rural areas for sure. You definitely see a big imbalance in that. Mm-hmm. But like city centers and whatnot, as far as, in Calgary, for example, I don't know that white is the majority.
No.
However, white is the majority of the system in power. Yeah. White is the majority of politics. White is the majority of brands and companies that have high buying power. White is the majority of people that are heavily overpaid for what they do.
Well, and same as Asians. I mean, there's tons of Asians that are right at the top of things because they're kind of, worldwide they're doing a really good job, but even in our country, that there's a lot of people that are really good at their jobs because they're, children of immigrants, and they're actually statistically known to do better because their work ethic is a little bit harsher than some people, but they also were acclimated because they grew up here, so they understand both sides better than white people do a lot of the time.
Well, certainly. I think that there is like a cultural expectation, there's a social expectation, and both of those together. Mm-hmm. I think way more heavily on a lot of people. You know, if you are coming from an immigrant family, and the children either are born here or take up the language quicker, they tend to be the translators for their family.
Yeah.
You know, I've talked to some kids in like elementary classrooms where they were doing the banking for their family because they understood like the language around it.
Oh. And
they had a better sense of the math because of what they were learning in school and what their parents didn't have access to, perhaps, mm-hmm. before they came over. You know, so they take on these adult roles so quickly. Certainly they could do amazing things with having such a quick acclimation to, you know, these adult expectations early on. But I feel like that takes a huge impact on their, like their mental health, their social health, all of those things as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Sometimes. I mean, my second interview was with Miss Din. She's a Chinese girl that I trained Kung Fu with. And she said when she was growing up that her family was, like, she was first generation, she was born in Canada. Mm-hmm. But they were telling her, or her parents, that it's like, your English is so bad, just speak Chinese to them, because they're going to pick up the language anyways. They're going to go to school. They're being taught English, and just in general, it makes them feel more comfortable being at home, sort of thing like that, where they're picking up something more easily than you guys are. So it'll be good for everybody, and then you guys can have your Asian lifestyle at home. Not to say that we're forcing anything or we're telling you what to do necessarily, but it's like if they're bilingual, it'll be easier for them to delve into both cultures, and then they'll have a better upbringing because it's so diverse that way.
Oh yeah.
And she'd even talked about, it's like, oh, get to go to somebody's, they get invited over for dinner. It's like, oh, I get to see what white people eat.
That's funny. Well, and it's all perspective too, you know, like that's not my lived experience. So, you know, I can relate what I've heard. Mm-hmm. I can relate my take on, oh wow, that's a lot for a kid to take on. But it's not my experience to speak to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that. I mean, she came from a pretty well-to-do family, not to say that they're rich necessarily, but she'd even said that she doesn't really have any reason to complain about stuff because she had a pretty comfortable life the whole time. Mm. And I think that's partly because of like we talked about, like work ethic and understanding that nothing's given to you. Mm-hmm. You know, and coming up in a new country, I'm sure she still sees her parents struggle for certain things. You know, and I get it, and it's understandable, but we also made the thing that I was kind of talking about, like my fear of some levels of racism and stuff, where I see an Asian person and I expect an accent, and she's like, I do the same thing. And I see somebody that's very clearly Chinese, like I don't necessarily want to talk to them in English even, because like I don't know if I'm going to get an accent, like a thick accent. Would they understand Mandarin better?
Oh, interesting.
Or whatever. But she's like, am I racist to my own people now because of it? Like, how does that work?
That is interesting. I don't know that that's necessarily. Racism is based around, you know, power dynamics. Prejudice is based around just snap decisions and assumptions. You know what I mean? So maybe there's some prejudice or some bias, but I don't think that those are implicitly bad. We all make snap decisions and have judgments in our minds. You know, it's when you act on them in a way that's rude. That's when it becomes a problem. You might think to yourself, oh, well, that person seems really snooty. And then you talk to them and you're like, wow, they're actually a really nice person. Yeah. That judgment isn't necessarily a problem unless like that person walks by and you tell somebody else, that lady is really snooty. And then later you have to backtrack and be like, wow, they're actually really nice. That was lame of me. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I think that's kind of the human condition, like that we're very much first impression. We're comparison engines, so we're comparing people and situations and things to everybody that we have already experienced or know. So we create a box for them. And then, you know, that this is the box that I've made for you, you fit in this box. And it's like, okay, until I talk to this person, then you can say, it's like, okay, well, now you fit into 3 other boxes that I didn't know about. But until you talk to them, they're exactly that.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that there's a way to turn that off. I think that that's in a lot of ways really, really helpful to have those kind of like, oh, okay, you notice things and you go off what you notice and then you build on that. What I think is important for people that are trying to, do better in general, like I like to think that I'm trying to do better. It's, you don't act on things until you have more information. You know what I mean? And I've noticed, you were saying that you expect an accent from people. I've noticed since focusing on, okay, I'm not going to make snap decisions and act on them, that I less expect something like that. I am pretty neutral in general when I meet somebody that is of a different ethnicity that's obvious, that I don't immediately expect that they have an accent. Because I've met so many people that, are born in Canada that are, or elsewhere that grew up English speaking in a, mishmash culture like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the other side of that is, though, too, like I remember watching a CBC program or something like that when I was a teenager. And it was the first time I'd heard a black person with an English accent, British accent. And it blew my mind, but it's like, well, of course they can live there too. Why wouldn't they? Like it's just again outside of my experience at the time. So it's not that I'm cognitively, or when I see somebody that has a different skin color or whatever sort of thing like that I'm expecting anything really necessarily.
Right.
But was something that I'd become aware of, sort of thing, and it's like, well, how do I get past this now? Because it's not even necessarily an issue, but it's something I'm aware of, so I should at least take time to think about it, talk to somebody about it. So.
Yeah. I think another thing that's actually really helped with that sort of breaking those internal stereotypes, in a sense, is learning other languages. Well, that I really enjoy learning all kinds of different things, but I don't necessarily keep it up.
It's tough.
But in these randomized moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to learn Gaelic. I want to learn Scottish Gaelic. You know what? I started doing this, but this made me think about French. I don't really know any French. We're supposed to know French as Canadians, so I should probably learn some French, but that's kind of like Spanish. Oh, my Spanish is really bad. I should focus on my Spanish. You know what? I should learn something completely different because I know these things a little bit. So let's go out of the box. I should learn some Mandarin. I'm going to learn some Mandarin. And then I'm like, you know what? I just saw somebody the other day and they were speaking ASL and that's so cool and I want to learn that. So I'm going to learn ASL. So you gather like little bits if you're like me. If you can actually stick with something, that's probably way better.
I don't know, not necessarily. I mean, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of generalized knowledge. I think it's really helpful for lots of stuff. I mean, I've learned way more about science after I graduated high school. I mean, granted, that was 20-some years ago now. But I mean, with the invention of things like YouTube and the internet in general, like having so much access to information, there's no reason why we all have to not know certain things. And it's okay to not know things. I mean, there's things that I definitely know about certain parts of science where I'll listen to some other people's podcasts, and to me it seems like super obvious knowledge that I thought people would just generally know, and say, well, I thought this person was a science communicator, but then they start talking about insects and it's like, okay, I'm out of my depth here completely. I understand now. We all have our certain likes, so we kind of gravitate towards certain things. But similar idea, it's like, well, yeah, you get into a language kick, then all of a sudden you're speaking little bits of 5 different languages, and then seeing how they kind of interconnect and know the history of where they've come from, so it's not like it's a bad thing.
For sure.
So,
well, I mean, yes, the internet is amazing in that sense, that there's so much information, but the problem is also that there's so much information.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's so many people that haven't had the experience in learning how to use this information or how to fact check. And, you know, it's been really problematic. You've seen all kinds of misinformation spreading like crazy. This is why we have things like, you know, anti-vaxxers and QAnon and all of this stuff, where, you know, people truly 100% believe stuff just because a certain person told it to you. And why are they trustworthy? Because it came from this other person that they think is trustworthy. But none of it is backed by actual fact, or none of it is backed by actual science.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you end up sometimes, when you're looking for information and wanting to check into it, it's a crazy amount of time that you can spend. It's another one of those emotional load things where, you know, somebody will say, well, I just learned this. Everybody needs to know it. And then, you know, if you're like me, then you'll go down a little rabbit hole for a little while doing some fact checking. And like an hour or so later, I'm like, well, I followed this article and it was by this person. So I checked into this person and here's their credentials, but their credentials were on this paper and this paper is bogus. So I looked into this and it came back to here. All of this is crap. This is based on nothing. This is, you know, it's got no foundation. So then you go back to that person, they're like, well, show me all of your, what are your sources?
Okay, well, this is my citation list, so.
Right? But then, you know, usually that person's like, well, I'm not going to read all that.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, but I just did all of that work for you and you don't believe anything that I just said. You take all that time to fact check just so that for yourself, you're not going to perpetuate all of this misinformation. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of time and effort, you know what I mean? And then if you want to argue it, it's like shouting against like a sea of people that are all facing the other way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and there's some things that people don't want to be challenged on. They just assume their belief and the whole idea of the echo chamber is very, very much a real thing, which I know I've gotten caught into a few times. I'm sure there's certain things I'm still in about certain parts of it. Yeah. The fact that I brought up Jordan Peterson. I'm not going to pretend
I actually don't even know who that is.
Oh, well.
I thought it was maybe somebody you talked to.
No, he was a science, or he's a clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology in Toronto, at the one of the universities there, and he basically got caught up with the whole, I don't think we should have compelled speech about gender pronouns and stuff like that. And then that was like 4 years ago, and he's gotten fairly famous for it. But digress though. The whole idea of that there's so much going on that like you should have the ability to check your own information if you have beliefs. If you have something to say about something, then you should know what the other side of what's going on, why people oppose this idea. And then you can truly know what you're actually saying. If you just say the same thing and then you talk to the same person, they just bounce it back right at you the same way you said it, or with slightly different paraphrasing. It's like, well, you guys are both wrong and you're just bringing more people into it now. You didn't try to look outside of that.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. I feel like if there was something similar to Google where it was like a fact check site, that would do amazingly well. Yeah. Right?
Well, and I think that's the good thing about the information age, is that a lot of the times there is that there, but we're still in the age of collecting knowledge. Mm-hmm. We're not at the age of wisdom yet, though. And there's a big difference.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if our species will ever reach wisdom in that case, because we're broken.
Well, yes, but at the same time, though, I think we're arguably better off now than we've ever been in a lot of ways. Arguably, I mean, the level of happiness isn't really changed, let's say, because we have different stresses and stuff in life, but simple things like access to food and relative safety, healthcare. I mean, granted, those of us that live in industrialized countries, and we're definitely more fortunate than a lot of other people. But at the same token, though, too, I think there's more that can be worked on. You know, when you know, gender issues and stuff like that are some of the biggest issues we have to talk about. It's like, we're doing good. If this is the biggest topic of the day, like, we don't have to worry about actual true problems that are really like tearing us apart as a human species. So.
I think that there's a lot of that under the surface, to be honest. I don't think we're quite at that point of like, oh, well, that's the only thing we need to worry about. I think that that's the only thing that a certain class of people need to worry about.
Yeah.
And in a general perspective, like our country, for example, you know, it's like, oh, well, Canada's really like multicultural. Canada's really like really good about like being anti-racist in general as a country. You know, Canada's really good with our healthcare, and it's like glossing over. It's like, you know, the people up here that don't have those issues are all just like, this is good, and everybody else is kind of like, yeah, well, you know, we're good, right? But we're not seeing that like layer below, where there's certainly lots of those struggles still. You know what I mean? There are plenty of people that are still, you know, not food secure, not shelter secure. There are plenty of people that experience a lot of issues with racism, and it's kind of like, well, Canada's not very racist.
Well, compared to who?
Right? Like, from a colonial perspective, maybe, but, you know, the way that Canada treats and has treated the Indigenous people, you know, people be like, I'm not racist at all. I have so many other friends. And you might hear them say something about, like, oh, those natives. And you're like, you know, okay, first of all, pretty sure native is a bit of a derogatory term at this point, since it's somewhat evolved. And then, you know, you hear people talking like, yeah, well, you know, if it was like 100 years ago, that we had reservations and blah, blah, why haven't they just integrated? Why do they still get free schooling and blah, blah, blah? Like, all of these issues that come up, and there's a very colonial perspective and a lot of looking down on people and saying things like, well, they're all drunks, well, they're all addicts, well, they're all homeless. It's huge generalization.
Yeah.
But those issues are perpetuated because of things that have happened, and nobody's, you know, really made a big impact as far as correcting the issues. You know, generations, sorry, my mouth just decided to stop working. Generations of trauma. And it just continues. The healthcare for mental health hasn't been stepping up. You know, the reservations that are supposed to be their land that they control still has all kinds of issues imposed on it. Maybe they're not getting any clean water. That's a problem for like a lot of places.
And a very basic need.
A very basic need. And how difficult is it to extend like some pipes and, you know, etc. from nearby towns? The structures exist.
Yeah.
You know, it's withheld because, oh, they're Indigenous. Oh, they have their own land. They can take care of it. You know, what is this? Why do we have to be so separate about it? Why do people have to have this kind of mentality of like they get more? No. You know, if you grew up on a place where you never had running water, where there's 12 people that live in like a double wide trailer house that's lifted on blocks because it doesn't have a true foundation, and you get like a free post-secondary education, does that make things better? You know what I mean? Like, and again, it's not my experience. It's not my lived experience.
Yeah.
But I just get really angry when I hear people saying like, oh yeah, Canada's not racist. Canada's really good. You know, like, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Statistically, you are 100% wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, that's just it. We took this from people.
Mm-hmm.
And not we necessarily, because, well, I mean, found out just recently that I'm definitely Métis, but, which, I mean, look at me, obviously I am. But
well, I mean, it's not obvious to assume, really.
Yeah,
right?
but I mean, but at the same token, though, too, I mean, that was the whole thing about being raised the way I was, though, is we didn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, we're white. Less problems that way.
Right.
And it's just easier. And on the other side of it, though, too, I mean, one of the other fellows that I trained Kung Fu with, he grew up in the Yukon. And his dad was a teacher, but he was one of the, well, him and his brother were the only white kids in school. Everybody else was indigenous. Mm-hmm. And my buddy got his ass kicked every day. So, it's not to say that maybe he didn't deserve some of it, but at the same token, though, too, I mean, yeah, when you're the minority, like, it doesn't matter what you think. It's a matter of, oh, these white people are here trying to take over. Like, your dad's a teacher. It's like, well, that in itself is a reason to get somebody their ass kicked, never mind, like, what color their skin is. You know, and to say that was a problem, it's like, well, you're not the only kid that got beat up in school, for one. But for two, I mean, well, you'd made the point of, like, they're violent and they're drunks and stuff like that. Okay, but when it's a white family that has those issues, like, oh, well, they just need some help. Yeah, but well, because it's the othering kind of thing where indigenous have exactly the same problems a lot of the time, they all of a sudden get put in a category because they're not one of us. You know, they're the othered sort of thing. And it's unfair because, yeah, there's been so much systemic problems where you have all these things taken from a people, and then you have generations of issues that are a problem that are not really dealt with.
Well,
and then you get raised in that kind of crap, and then you have kids of your own, and it's like, well, nobody knows how to fix this. Nobody's...
Well, and that's not the only problem. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, those are all big problems, and they need to be dealt with much better than they're being handled by any of the systems that we have in place. Mm-hmm. But the stigma and the systemic kind of racism and people's privilege that they aren't aware of, I don't know. I had my eyes opened a lot when I had to go through some of the situations I went through. Like, being with an abusive partner and dealing with the social services, mm-hmm. They look the other way, in a sense, quite a bit, you know? Like, they came in for a home visit and talked to me privately about some of the issues, and I tried to be a little, like, more frank, mm-hmm. Even though I hadn't quite worked through my stuff to realize just how much I was minimizing the issues that I was dealing with. But they kind of just said, well, you know, you're dealing with it. You know.
Just get over it.
Right? They kind of were like, yeah, you guys should be fine, probably. Right? Whereas I've talked to other families where, you know, they've had their kids taken from them for, you know, going out drinking with a friend, and the babysitter said that they were drunk when they came home.
Yeah.
That's what going out drinking typically leads to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But all that's all they needed for CPS to come in and, or CFS, Calgary Family Services, mm-hmm. to come in and just take their kids because they were Indigenous. You know? Like, it's pretty horrific, the kind of privilege that seems to exist.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. When I left, I didn't have anywhere safe to stay for a longer term, mm-hmm. and I went into the shelters.
Yeah.
Right. They had wait lists to get in, and the kids and I were able to get in. And you know, I remember being there, and a family that came was an Indigenous mom and probably 7 kids. They were turned away. They said, "We don't have room for you."
Holy smokes.
You know, like, okay, but I got in with my 2 kids. Just 2. You know?
Yeah, and arguably that woman with her family needs far more help.
Right?
Not that you didn't, but...
I mean, you know, when I was going through the system, getting like social supports, I know that there were other families that had a hard time getting onto the social supports because, you know, they were an immigrant family or something. Okay, well, you're not a Canadian citizen, or you're not a naturalized citizen, as they call it, or anything like that. That made it even harder for them to get those social supports. They had to go through immigration services to try and get help. You know, when I went to court, I was received very well because I was able to, you know, dress up nice, and I have, you know, a way of speaking that sounds, I don't know how to put it, not academic, but like,
somewhat intelligent.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Like educated.
Yeah.
Like I sounded educated to somebody else, even though, you know, that's arguable versus somebody else who has come from somewhere else and they have like a PhD, but they didn't speak English naturally and were treated very differently.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Because they didn't speak English as clearly and as educated as myself.
Yeah. Well, they know what they want to say. They just don't know how to say it in English.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually made a lot of calls for some of the other families and spoke on their behalf in order to get them help, because they would listen to me and they wouldn't listen to them, which is really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You know, I was able to get a place to rent, leaving the system on social care, because I was a, you know, nice single mom with 2 kids that's white and speaks well, and was able to get a place to rent, where a lot of families really struggled. I saw a lot of this privilege, and like part of me felt bad for being able to have this privilege, which, you know, I needed to be able to get on my feet, but other people needed it too. You know what I mean? So I don't know, like there's that, being able to get into like university after that, being able to get student loans that carried me through. If I didn't have student loans, I wouldn't have been able to do school. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, and the fact that you applied for them and got them is a big thing too, because same thing. You probably wrote an intelligible, for just to get any sort of application filled out for one thing, but being able to go and talk to somebody about it after, and then making sure all the paperwork's in order. And that was always one thing I thought was kind of interesting between the two of us, because we used to party hard when we were younger. But I mean, that was always the thing. Like, we'd have our, you know, dick and fart jokes and stuff like that. And, but the thing is, like, when we wanted to have like a deep, well thought out conversation, we could do that with each other still too, which I thought was always appreciated about you. Why you're here today talking to me, I think, is because I think we've been lucky enough to have, privileged basically, to say that, you know, we are a good representation of what the system can produce, but that's because we're white. Right. And it's part of it, which is...
I know. And when I was with my kids, that's not the only time I was homeless, you know? Like, technically, when I was couch hopping and staying with you guys for as long as your brothers put up with me. Yeah. Yeah. Like, technically, you know? Yeah. Technically, I was homeless. I didn't have my own address or any of that. I had phone.
Well, and I remember... The one time that you were at the shelter, and I came and saw you in Forest Lawn or whatever that was, because that was the area sort of thing, and you were noticeably distraught. I mean, you had your kids with you, and we went out for a walk, almost got us hit by a car that one time. Same thing. But it was interesting. But at the same token, though, too, like talking to you about certain things, and you're like, well, no, you can't come back to the shelter. You're a man. I was like, oh, right, duh. Yeah. Just because I know I'm a nice enough person, it doesn't matter. It's like, you're not allowed to be here because you've been the problem for just about everybody that's inside. Not me specifically, but I represent that. And I understand that. It's just like, there is so much that I don't know what is going on, because I haven't lived part of it, for one. But for two, it's just like, well, take half a second to think about this women's shelter. Well, why is it a necessity in the first place? There are so many reasons why you need something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your case is one, maybe two reasons. You know, there are dozens or hundreds of other reasons why those things are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good that they're there, but is there enough? Are they supported well enough? I guarantee they're not.
No, absolutely not. I was able to take like a free counseling course for people that had dealt with abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It was free to me because of being in the shelter. Otherwise, it was sliding scale, and I wouldn't have even been able to pay that.
Yeah.
Right? But I was able to get in because they had so many spaces, and I advocated for myself, and I asked around, and I was able to get in versus, you know, other people that didn't know to ask, didn't push for it, and also didn't have the same kind of privilege again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it wasn't automatic. They should have counseling for every person there. Every person there.
Yeah.
Not just the parents, you know, the children too.
Yeah.
And that wasn't offered because it's not an option. It's not available. They don't have counselors available for people in shelter.
Yeah. Well, you would almost think that it'd be kind of part of the intake, is that you kind of need to talk to all the people that are showing up there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would make sense partly because you're bringing them under your care for one, but for two, yeah, like, I mean, why wouldn't you want to talk to them or have some level of understanding of what their specific needs and whatever are? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I understand it gets bogged down with a lot of, you know, drama and history and stuff, but I mean, that's kind of the purpose of the shelter in the first place, is that these people need something better.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're there. So they need somebody to talk to. Like, don't force them to talk to somebody, obviously. I mean, there's some people that they need their time to kind of figure out what it is that they have to say or what's going on for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it should always be available, and they should be encouraged at least to talk to somebody.
Well, and even if they were told part of the condition of being here is that you need to be able to be part of this counseling group. If they show up and they don't talk, they're there, and they're learning something, and they're thinking about, you know, what's being said.
Yeah.
And that's something.
Well,
and
yeah.
like, you know, that I feel like that is discounted in a way that's not right. It's the same sort of thing as going to mental health care groups, or you know, even if you were hospitalized for mental health care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went through depression when I was younger and was hospitalized for it, and I refused to speak to the counselor because I wasn't ready. I was just so stuck in that deep pit of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they discharged me because I refused to talk to them. And then I was on my own, you know? And I feel like it's the same kind of thing. It's like, well, if you won't talk to me, you're not doing the work. I was there, and I came to the counseling, and I listened to what they were telling me, and that was part of what helped, even if I didn't talk to them. You know what I mean?
Well, and sometimes it needs to sit and roll around for a bit before it finds some purchase, and it actually, you know, gains that level of traction where, oh, that's why they're saying this. Oh, this is starting to make sense. You know, 2-3 years later, it's like, okay, well, I'm glad I did these group classes, because even though I didn't say anything, I listened and I heard some things that I can't help but find out to be true now. And I was pissed off because people are telling me what to do, but it's like, they weren't doing it because they were pissed off at me.
Mm-hmm.
They're pissed off at the situation, and it's like, let us help you. And I get that. And I've been through my own family shit and my own depression and whatever sort of thing. And I mean, I wasn't clinical. I'm pretty sure they gave you lithium at one point, which horrendous. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people need it. I understand that. But at the same time, you were somebody that also needed to, from what I saw and what I remember, is that you just needed to be out and away from something. And it wasn't necessarily family, but it wasn't necessarily the system that we're all have to be a part of. Like, we live in a society, we live in a city. You can't really necessarily just run to the mountains and live by yourself. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but that wasn't really your thing either.
Well, I mean, I needed to work through my stuff, and at the same time, working through my stuff, I didn't necessarily do that in like healthy ways.
No, I remember. I was there for some of it.
Okay, I know. But you know,
I kind of remember.
Yeah, when they had me try lithium, it wasn't. It was like, you try this or you'll be hospitalized again.
Yeah.
And it did not work for me, and it was awful. And there was a lot of anger and pushback from like caregivers, being like, well, you know, you're not helping yourself at all if you don't take this. You're not, like, this can't be the only option.
Yeah.
This can't, I feel like a numb, drooly zombie person who is only existing, and I don't want to only exist, right? No thanks.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part of it is too, where a lot of psychiatrists are the ones that are typically looking to just give medications and balance things out, and they also have to realize that being happy all the time isn't realistic.
No,
sometimes you need to feel depressed or angry or frustrated. You need to go through some of those things sometimes to understand them better. Not to say that you want to stay there or whatever, but just to level everything out and try to go towards happiness, or at least some level of numbness. I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing either, right? Like,
yeah, I don't think that you need to experience these things, but I think that the kind of tendency to say, oh, well, we can give you medication and that'll help, and that's the only solution.
Yeah.
No, that's only fixing the chemistry part, but it's not fixing any of the other issues that may have triggered the depression, if you have triggers, or you know, that help you deal with all of those internal feelings at all. It's just like, okay, well, your brain chemistry will get better, but everything else, just, you know, that's not enough. I feel like going through that kind of stuff without the medication in some ways helped me with my coping mechanisms to eventually find more healthy ways to cope. But I don't think that it should be just take the medication, that's the only thing that fixes it.
Yeah.
I don't think that medication should not be an answer at all either, though. Yeah. You know, sometimes you need a little boost.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you just can't break that loop you've been put in. Sometimes you don't realize how much something helps. You wouldn't know. I've been taking medication for ADD this last year. Holy crap, has that made a difference? Like, maybe for somebody who's observing me outside of myself, would be like, you're pretty much exactly the same. You still forget crap. You get in like little weird loops. You get too excited about things. You don't make sense sometimes because you're talking so fast, right? But you fidget. You can't leave things alone. All of those
that's
things.
That's my manic side.
All of those things still exist. But for me, I can manage my day so much better. I saw like a drawing cartoon kind of thing, and I don't remember who the artist was, but it had an analogy that absolutely was like that. Absolutely that. That was like every day was like trying to walk through like deep mud, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, taking the medication, you're on like dry ground, and there's none of that restriction, and it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that hard. It doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I think to a degree I know exactly what you're talking about, because I started really delving into what addiction actually is, and how, I mean, I hate the phrase self-medicating because it's not what it is. People are running from their problems, and they're getting drunk or they're doing drugs of some type to numb the pain. And
I think in some ways that's the perfect word for that, though.
Yeah, I guess. Well, more so in my personal experience, I should probably make clear of the fact that it was my drinking wasn't the problem, and addiction is not because of drinking or something. It's because, well, again, for me, is because the actual problem is something that was sitting way deep inside. Mm-hmm. And drinking was definitely an issue, but it was not the reason why I was drinking is because I had a chemical addiction to the alcohol. It's not what it was. It was me trying to cover up or run from something. Part of the reason why I was so angry when I was younger. I didn't know why. But it's just like if I drink, it makes me feel happy at least. Mm-hmm. For a while. And then it puts you in a further lower point when you're sobering up.
Or less angry, or less sad. Yeah. Or less nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's better just to not feel things. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I smoke so much grass is because it's like, well, if I don't feel anything, there's hollow is better than angry, because people don't like me when I'm angry. You know, and it not Hulk level. It's just like a shitty person, which is worse. But I mean, that was the whole thing about understanding the addiction. It doesn't matter if it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or pornography or whatever. The addiction is a physical pathway that requires some level of reward system. Mm-hmm. Some of that is that the idea of just basically like getting rid of the drinking. Well, it didn't solve really anything. The drinking wasn't the problem. It was the bandage that I was trying to use to cover up the problem. Mm. So delve deep into what the problems are, and I saw a psychologist years ago, and I'm actually seeing one again now. It's been about an 8-year break in between. But this time around, it is so much easier partly because I've done the process for one, but I was recommended to go see one because of my ex-girlfriend, but my most recent ex. But the idea of going to talk to somebody and to understand myself better in the first place is a huge help, because I know a lot of what my issues are, how much I've worked on a lot of stuff, where a lot of other services are helpful. Like Alberta Health Services actually does have a lot of good grief counseling. There was a group of classes that I did, 9 different topics. One was specifically on anger, one was on guilt, one was on vulnerability. I don't remember the exact... No, I'm good, thank you. But at the same token, like there were so many things where I did exactly that, like because some of it was a group class, and we kind of just, sometimes you wouldn't say much and you just sit and listen and understand other people's problems, and you know, understand gratitude and realize that there is a lot in my life that I should be happy for. Why am I feeling this anger? What is the root of it? Where did a lot of this stuff come from? And you start dealing with the issues of where abuse and all this other stuff started, and where the anger is coming from. Then you realize that drinking and the drugs are nothing. Like that's actually easy to take care of now, because that was never the problem. It was just an excuse to get rid of the problem or run from the problem. So then understanding addiction better, and how it's not to want to feel the pain or whatever, so you just have some sort of quick reward system that's, you know, quickly dumps a bunch of dopamine or serotonin into your body, and I'm good for the next 5 minutes. You just live in this for 5 minutes, and then it all comes back. So you do another drink or another whatever sort of thing like that, and that wasn't the answer. Mm-hmm. Look for the answer in a lot of bottles. It wasn't in any of them. So
might have been, but you forgot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But it's definitely one of those things where having the need to want to figure out what's going on, and unfortunately came after terrible shit happens. But I mean, that's kind of what happens in families, is terrible shit is there, and if you don't deal with it, it gets worse. You know, and running from my problems didn't work. You know, and when I talk to people about that sort of thing, it's like, let me be an example so you're not like me. Don't let this stuff sit and fester in your brain until it becomes like some sort of physical problem or some sort of psychological issue or something like that, because like, you can't bury things. You cannot. It comes out as autoimmune disease, or it comes out as some sort of violence or some sort of mental issue or something. Like it's going to come out one way or the other. But if you deal with it and let it happen, then it's way more easy to be a part of, and own the fact that we all have problems. You know, like,
for sure. I have a big problem with things like the 12-step program and complete abstinence. Like, these programs statistically do not work. And they're very problematic. Like, oh, I had a drink, I better call somebody. I'm going to shame myself. I'm going to have somebody else shame me. We're going to work on, the issues of my drinking. But they don't address any of the other things.
Yeah.
Addiction, it's good that there has been some science starting to look into it. But when they discovered, like, those pathways in the brain that relate to addiction, they stopped. Almost, like it's further research has gone on, but that took up the biggest scope of public awareness. But addiction is almost always tied to pain.
Yeah.
Almost always. There's no reason for somebody to try something and feel like, oh, I'm addicted because they took it once and there's pleasure pathways. Why would you go back to that if you don't have a reason where you're like, I need to get away from this other thing? Certainly there are things that feel great, right?
Yeah.
But to take up your whole life, to basically burn your life down over it, that doesn't happen just because something feels good, Yeah. It's because it's the only thing that feels good, or...
Well, they talked about a lot of people being addicted to all kinds of drugs when they were, Vietnamese war was happening, and all these American soldiers are going over there to fight a battle that they didn't really understand in the first place, and they're doing these terrible things, and a lot of them were drinking or doing a bunch of drugs to get over it. But when they came home, they just stopped doing most of that stuff because it's like, oh, I can be like a normal person again, which in itself took a long time, and there's still people dealing with their PTSD and stuff like that. But understanding that there are certain things like psychedelic treatment and stuff that can help get through these things, and even calling it PTSD, I think there's been some of that's been stigmatized in the sense where, post-traumatic stress disorder, you have something wrong with you. No, you had something happen to you. You were a part of something. So, it was funny because I remember listening to somebody talk about PTER, post-traumatic event response. And the idea of that, instead of giving it that stigma where it's like, a post-traumatic event is probably more accurate because you don't necessarily want to be a part of this, or even if you did sign up for it, it's still not easy for anybody to take. And to call it a response as opposed to a disease, it's like, everybody's going to respond to things. How did you respond to it? Did you harbor it? And do you sit with this anger and frustration? Do you have flashbacks? Do you want to go do something about this? This is a response that you're having to these things that keep flashing up in your mind. It's not a disease or disorder where you need to feel bad about it and you're weak for not being able to deal with it.
Well, certainly, and taking the self out of it, like, it's your body's response. It's not your response, your choice to respond this way.
Yeah.
Your body is responding this way, and then how you react to how your body responds is a separate thing. I feel like once you start attaching a sense of responsibility, whether it's something that is interpreted or real to something that is stigmatized, that's where things go downhill a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's like, oh, it's my fault. I did the thing.
Yeah.
But,
Arguably, I think that's probably one of the really good benefits of interconnectivity and having things like social media where people feel like they're alone. They feel like their depression is bottomless and they're by themselves, or they're experiencing something that nobody else could possibly have. And then they get online and they start asking questions and finding groups, and it's like, oh, I'm not the only person that's like this. I don't necessarily have to go somewhere, but at least I can talk to even a small community where there's other people that actually understand my pain.
Totally.
Understand what can be done, and maybe even once in a while, other than just talking about it, like maybe they can guide me somewhere where I can get more help that I think I need. And a lot of the time, none of it's expensive. The thing that it costs is your own patience, and you're willing to work on it.
Right. Again, social means of healthcare.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and financially, I think there's too much push on finance, which I think was part of the industrial age, and a lot of stuff that's been we're starting to finally now kind of parse apart what's actually important, how to make more productive people and make them happier. Like Henry Ford actually made a 2-day weekend. He's the reason why there's a 2-day weekend, because he's like, well, if people come in more rested, they'll actually work harder. And now in some of the European countries are going for 3-day weekends.
Mm-hmm. Like a 4-day work week?
A 4-day work week. So people are, again, more productive because they have time to be social and enjoy the life that they want to have, as opposed to just pushing into the grind and not having anything but work to think about. And some people love that. Some people are lucky enough to have exactly the job they want, and they work all the time. And that's fantastic. But even at that, though, I mean, they still want to have hobbies. They still want to have family time. They still want to have other parts of their life that they can do. So I think that with having a lot of social media and stuff, being able to bring attention and bring communities into different groups, so people can talk and understand themselves just as much as each other, and how we can fit together into society. I mean, more often than not, we're not all going to get along, I think, but it's something that we're pushing through. We're kind of like a bunch of kids just yelling and screaming at each other at the moment. But once we get over that, and we kind of start pointing the finger at ourselves just as much as anything. That's actually one thing my grandmaster told me. It's like every time you point the finger at somebody, 3 more are pointing back at you. So who are you actually criticizing? And I think more the people complain about things, they're going to start to look at themselves more often. And I think it's good. I think we all need to take a good look at ourselves and say, well, what am I contributing? I think it's important, Not everybody has to. Not everybody has to have big life-changing things. I mean, my dad was a good man. He wasn't a great man, but he was a good person. He did his job. He lived his life the way he wanted to, and he had 4 boys that he was pretty proud of. So, I mean, he doesn't have to be, world-changing. His name doesn't have to be in history books. Right. But as long as he contributes in the way that he knows how, and he does a decent job of it. I mean, people in my hometown remember who he was, and they love the guy that he was to the community. Didn't have to make big leaps and bounds there, but he was a decent person. So
I think once you get to a certain point in life, it's not like, oh, I want to be famous, so I want to have a lot of money. It's like, oh, I want people to think well of me, right? I think that perspective kind of shifts. You start seeing a lot more of people that you knew passing away, and you go, wow, there's like 10 of us here at this, celebration of life, or right? Or you start to think there's a bigger picture than, oh, I want to be the most happy person. Well, it's obviously not going to happen, because
yeah.
Even with the best things available, like, some of us are just not physically built to be, experience it that way. But yeah, I think there's like a perspective shift. It used to be this whole like, oh, midlife crisis kind of thing. People buy things and, try to change their life to be like more wild and stuff. And I think I've seen a lot of people between like our age and, the next 10 years up or so, starting to get into the midlife thing and really kind of digging in to like themselves, doing a lot of self-reflection, perspective, and going, yeah, what do I really want? And not just what do I really want, but how can I be more good?
Yeah.
You know what? Like, for the earth, for the people around me, like, what can I do better? How can I be better?
Yeah, how can I contribute in certain ways?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, backtrack a little bit there. The idea of the whole midlife crisis for like materialism, at least anyways, like some of that's like, well, I've always wanted a Porsche. I can finally afford one now. That's why I have one. It's not because I'm definitely not a car guy, but that's, I mean, usually an easy example of what people do. They want to get, some sort of fancy car sort of thing like that because it's, they wanted one their whole life. They, they're 50 years old now. They can afford to get one finally. But on the other side, though, too, I think, there's a lot of people that are also doing more meaningful things, that are creating charities or going on, larger family trips, because it's like, well, I want the whole family to come with me to do something fun and memorable.
Right? Some of us are just thinking like, wow, will I ever be able to afford a home?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and is that truly the goal that we should have in mind even? Is it materialism that we need to feel important or feel successful?
Right. I think that's less about materialism as it is about like a sense of security. Right? When you're renting, certainly there are things that make renting really great. In a sense, like you don't own the property, so you're not paying the property taxes.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about like the general upkeep stuff. When something starts to break down, you have a landlord, you call them, it's their job to make sure that the place stays livable.
Yeah.
All of those things. But it's always somebody else that owns your stability. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, I had a hard month and I wasn't able to make the full amount of rent. It's not like when you have a mortgage and, the bank works with you on payment plans and stuff like that. Your landlord can just say, not cool, guys. If you're month to month, okay, well, next month don't be here. Right?
Yeah.
Or, they can choose to sell even when you're still in a lease.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of rules that allow this sort of thing. And then what? Well, I was planning to renew the lease next month. Well, actually, I want to sell, or I want to get different tenants, or I want to do renovations. So I'm not going to renew the lease. Then you're like, wow, okay, now I have to find somewhere else to live. That stability is always somebody else's. You know what I mean? So I think that that's part of it. It's not so much about materialism. It's about like having the sense that you can actually put down roots and relax a little bit about, will I still be here in 3 years?
Yeah.
Well, if I want to sell my house, I could be somewhere else. Well, if I want to, put it on Airbnb and go traveling, okay.
Yeah.
But I still have,
Thank you for the perspective shift, because Cole and I have owned a house for 11 years, 12 years almost now. And we're both bachelors. I mean, we're kind of getting tired of living with each other partly, but we want to buy another house eventually here. Well, not eventually, fairly soon. But, clearly neither of us are parents. So, that's definitely something that I can fully understand, especially coming from difficulties, having very small children when things started to get really bad with your ex and whatever, and having to deal with stuff that the minimum I want to have is a roof over my head. Oh yeah, right, that is kind of a basic need, especially in Canada where it gets goddamn cold sometimes,
right?
So it's not even you at that point. You almost don't even matter at that point. It's what they need, because children definitely can't take care of themselves. They think they can
at a certain age, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, but and then the next step up is food security. Okay, so you get a place. Well, can you afford to eat? Well, I mean, you can afford to get the most cheap processed crap that stays on the shelf for a long time because it's 50 cents for a can. And knowing that I have this much of the month to feed to everybody, if I get the nice groceries that spoil faster and are more healthy, I won't have something in 2 weeks when I don't have money coming in for it.
Yeah.
Like that sort of making those choices. People say, oh yeah, it's actually it's not that expensive to eat healthy. And I'm like, let's switch budgets.
Yeah.
Let's do this. I want to see how well you do on like $150 a month for food.
Yeah.
For 3 people.
Yeah.
Right?
Talk about making things stretch.
Right?
Yeah.
So, when we don't have to worry as much, like when I had my student loans and I was able to parse that out and we were able to, get groceries that we actually wanted, be like, about $400 a month for groceries.
Nice.
Right? $200 twice in the month.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, about average right now. So, yeah. And that's like low end, you know. We want to eat healthy and comfortably, but we're not getting all the things we want, right? Yeah. There's still a limit. I think that a lot of people haven't lived food insecure if they make those kind of judgments, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize that I grew up like on bordering on poor.
Yeah.
You know, like my parents managed to stretch things really well. We were in all kinds of things like dance, gymnastics, martial arts, sports, lots of sports.
Yeah.
All of those things. And a lot of it was because we were in a small town and it was like begged and bartered back and forth. You know, like I'll watch your kids for the next month after school. If you can help us, you know, if we can be in this dance class or, you know, like those sort of things.
Yeah.
That's not a kind of thing that you can do in a big city. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, my parents had said the same thing too when my oldest brother had moved out and he was having a hard time taking care of his son when he was very small. And wondering how my parents did it. And it's like, well, when, like back in the day when a CD cost like $20, it's like, well, you know how much food I can buy for $20? Sure, I'm glad there's, you know, music out there that people want to buy, but $20 is something that I just simply cannot spend on a CD.
Right.
I need to take care of the kids. So when I shouldn't be shitting on my oldest brother like this, but at the same time, I mean, that was one thing that my parents had made a point of saying is that you have different priorities and they cost money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to take some of that consideration and focus what your money needs to go on, then do that. But don't complain when you have 100 CDs on your shelf and you don't have enough money to cover rent this month.
Yeah.
So
I think that there's perspective in that too.
Oh, for sure.
When you are living like hand to mouth like that, month to month, not sure how much money you're going to make, those little pleasures, they go a long way.
Hugely.
You know, and I feel like it's not so much about like the materialism and all that stuff. It's just like this, you know that there's a deep void, and for just a moment, that little thing that's just for me, it fills it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like those potholes that they fill in with grout, and you're like, ooh, it's filled, and the next day you're like, oh yeah, never mind, it rained.
Yeah. No, and I get it, and it's really easy for me to be on the outside looking in because I have no idea what it's like to have kids. You know,
if you never have those extras, though.
Yeah.
Can you imagine going like 10 years or so, never doing a single thing outside of budget, just maintaining the minimum of like, okay, we have actual food. Okay, we've actually paid rent. I didn't like push off any of my bills. I paid all of my bills.
Yeah.
And never doing anything, just that little thing for yourself, like going out for a meal with a friend instead of like, oh, I'm going to meet you after a mealtime so we can hang out, but I have no money, right? Being able to go to like a movie or having like a movie at home that you bought and you can watch whenever you like because you love it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like those little things. It's the same kind of thing as like how people are stigmatized for buying like cigarettes or alcohol when they live in a shelter or something like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't allowed when I was living in the shelter.
Yeah.
They said you can't drink, you can't smoke. But it's those little pleasures, right? Just the little minor things. You get a bottle of wine and that could be, you know, like 2 months worth of like a little sip here and there.
Yeah.
Right? And that somebody says you can't have that, and you have just this little bit of money, and you have to make it stretch, but no little joys.
Yeah.
Like.
No, I understood part of that when I was doing construction, and living it up way too much, and not just going out and partying or whatever. It was mostly like going out to eat or having these adventures and stuff like that, going to the mountains, doing whatever traveling sort of thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then work dried up.
Yeah.
Bills don't stop though. And then all of a sudden I would go from living on $75,000 a year to 40 or less. And it's like, holy shit, did I ever waste a lot of money?
Mm-hmm.
I should have a lot more for how much money I had. You know, at minimum a bigger savings account. You know, like, and And then thinking about it, it's like my parents raised us on less than half of what I've spent this year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like even accounting for inflation and whatever, that sort of thing. It's like,
Well,
I'm kind of a selfish dick, actually, when I think about it, because it's like I didn't plan for my future very well at all. Like I had a bit of a rainy day fund and stuff too, and then all of a sudden those little simple pleasures, I started to realize like I'm just going and letting my id control my entire life now, because it's all I'm doing is satisfying or trying to satisfy those little pleasures constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to do this? Do I need to have that? No. You know, we started training Kung Fu, and it's just like, okay, there's a far more humble way to live life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and understand what a need is.
Yeah, there's certainly a balance. It's a conversation all the time. Like, kids always want something when we go somewhere.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Oh, your thingy stopped.
Oh,
if that matters.
That's all right. We'll move this one camera one more time. All right.
Yeah.
That's weird. I thought this one actually had. Oh, I wonder if it's plugged into the. Oh, it should be working.
I didn't notice until just now. Sorry.
Oh, whatever. No, I usually have a plug. Actually, just running out to my truck and grabbed it, but whatever. Well, either way, yeah. I mean, to your point of having, you know, simple life pleasures and stuff like that. It's easy to take a lot of stuff for granted.
Mm-hmm. You can manage without, but if you take all of that away, you kind of get into this feeling of like, you know, I work, I eat, I sleep, I clean, I work, I eat, I sleep, I clean. Like,
droning on is not in existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the whole idea of retirement is like you know, you've contributed and then you get to enjoy life however afterwards. Well, so many people don't have that option.
Yeah.
Right? There's no saving when you're living month to month. That's not a thing.
No.
Right? So if you stay on that trajectory, and most of the time it's not anybody's choice in that sense, what happens when you are, you know, past retiring age and supposedly living out your golden years, but they're really more like rust?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, not only that, I mean, life happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you save money for a time of your life where you can't maybe even physically enjoy it? Or maybe you don't get there.
Right.
I mean, I could get hit by a car when I leave here today.
Well,
like, there's nothing saying that I'm going to make it through anything. Life is not a granted thing to anybody. So that is kind of the other side of it, where it's nice to save and be comfortable with certain things, but I'm not going to give up my whole life for a future that may not even exist.
Well, and I think that's something that our generation has a better handle on than some of the generations. Like, there's this expectation that has, you know, the system that you work until a point where you can't work, and then you live out your years because you've saved up enough money. But, you know, from like my grandparents who, you know, lived through the Depression, saving was so important. Every penny, you know, if you had 10 cents, you'd put 2 cents away.
Yeah.
Right? And that was important for them. But they also had things like my grandpa moved to Kimberley, got a job at the comical mine, and they had a house as part of the contract.
Nice.
Yeah. So the company paid their mortgage as part of his paycheck. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
that's pretty awesome.
That's not a thing anymore, unless you are in like some sort of high profile job, like a surgeon or something, and they've got like moving incentives, and they'll be like, yeah, we'll give you a house. Okay, but you're also getting paid like $500,000 a year at least.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that those companies can do, like, you know, private healthcare companies or companies like AHS kind of thing. Obviously, they don't do it here. But, you know, that's not a thing for most of us. Or you can't go from, like, a high school or, like, a dropout education, get a decent job that sustains your whole family on one income, have a home that you don't have to worry about being able to afford or pay mortgage or lose to the bank, none of those are, that's like a fairy tale at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. That is one thing that, I mean, because there's more and more people all the time, there still there's work and industry and jobs that are coming up all the time that we never thought of, 20 years ago even. Mm-hmm. So it's good that we're growing and evolving in certain ways, but I mean, there's a lot of people that fall through the cracks. Mm-hmm. Is the other part, because they didn't have anything really to start with in the family, and they weren't given a decent work ethic, or the parents didn't have an opportunity to give them anything really. Mm-hmm. Food insecurity, like you talked about. I mean, apparently there's some ridiculous amount of, I don't remember the number exactly, but there's a lot of kids that go to school hungry. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make any sense in this country.
Well, there's an abundance, but it's not available because of this whole, monetary obsession, right? Yeah. That everything has to be monetized. And, sometimes it doesn't seem like too bad, in a sense. Like you've got some spaghetti and whatever. I don't know how many times when I was younger, I didn't even think that we were eating poor when we'd have, like, spaghetti with, like, butter and Parmesan on it.
Yeah.
And that was a meal, right?
Yeah.
And that was, like, 4 meals.
Yeah.
You didn't think about that because you were being fed.
Well, it's just that, we would have, like, floats and chips and a movie on Friday.
Right.
It's like, it's the end of the week. We're gonna celebrate because we made it to the end of the week. But that's the thing. It's like we didn't get treats. I mean, kids talked about getting whatever kind of food for lunches and stuff, and I was getting peanut butter and jam or bologna sandwiches all the time. Mm-hmm. It's like that's literally the most that my parents could afford. But but it also made me realize that when it's time to actually have at least some level of reward or whatever, or staving off certain things, it makes it that much more worthwhile. And it's something that through my 20s especially I didn't understand the idea of postponing the enjoyment of something. It's just like I had the money, I'm just going to go and get what I want right now, and I get instantly gratified on what it is that I was craving. Mm-hmm. And then you realize that after a while it's like you need to postpone some of those things, because if you're constantly satisfying your cravings, they're less satisfied. It takes more and more all the time, and that's kind of exactly what an addiction is.
Yeah. Is
that you want things to be more joyful and last longer, but that's the opposite of how they work. And that's why you have to start drinking more or gambling harder or whatever sort of thing like that to get that same serotonin dump. Mm-hmm. And instead of just wait a couple of days, then go for a beer or whatever sort of thing like that, or do something that you deserve that slice of cake at the end of the week or something like that.
Right.
And it's not just little things. I mean, I'll think about certain things where it's like, well, I want to have some level of physical fitness, but it's like, okay, exactly that kind of thing. Like I want to earn my dessert today, so I'm going to work my job and go to the gym and go teach or train kung fu or something like that. Then it's like I won't feel bad about doing it, because I could just sit around and eat cakes all day and be 300 pounds, but that's not a fun life either. So
no, but it's that gratification thing too sometimes, like you might have things in the cupboard, there's food there. Mm-hmm. You don't want any of it, so you order out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes that's not an option. I feel like a lot of people don't understand that food insecurity sometimes doesn't mean that you don't have bare cupboards.
Yeah.
But you don't have healthful food, and you don't have a consistent availability of food, right? Or
like you said, like you have spaghetti 5 nights in a row. It's mm-hmm. like, spaghetti again?
Yeah, spaghetti with almost nothing on it.
Yeah,
right?
You're eating. That's the best I can do today, sorry to say.
Right?
Yeah. No, I remember growing up like that too, and it wasn't, lucky that we had a lot of family mm-hmm. living nearby, and they, like my one auntie in particular, had a massive garden, which helped us get through a lot, and we grew up with still canning and pickling things, and mm-hmm. which doesn't happen that much anymore with a lot of people. But you buy things that are, when they're available, and you make use of them. Like, today I don't know if I'm going to have time now, but I wanted to go to the farmer's market and pick up peaches and blueberries because they're cheap because they're in season.
Right.
So, but it's like I know that I can have those in December because I'll freeze most of it and have it saved till then. And volume and cost, it's absolutely worth it.
Oh, it's so nice when people can have gardens. Some people are actually really good with plants. I was actually thinking the other night, I should look up on the internet, can somebody have like an aura that kills plants or something? Because
it's not your jam, eh?
I love plants.
However,
I love plants. I would love to have a garden. Nothing grows around me. And I don't think it's like, like the bad juju kind of thing, because I don't think I'm like, plants are like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that I give off this like bad person energy to plants, but for some reason they just don't grow around me. There are some people that can like look at a plant and it sprouts. I'm the person that like walks by and it wilts, and I'm like, why? I'm sorry. Like.
Yeah, that's not for lack of trying. Although I know that one thing I know for sure, you can't water a cactus every day. They look cool for the first week or so, and they just get like really big because they're sucking up all that water.
Okay.
Then they rot. It's like, oh, that's why they grow in the desert, right? Yeah.
That sounds unpleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't thought about having cactuses. I'm not. They look neat, but I'm not really a fan of being around like really pokey things when I'm a clumsy person. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know. And I remember my little brother had. When we first went to Arizona the first time ever, my grandparents had a place that they would go to in the winter.
Yeah.
And for a while, I think it was a good 5 years or so, every other year we would go down to Arizona for Christmas. My grandparents like flew us down there, did all of that for us so that we could go. It was really cool. But my little brother saw a cactus and he said, "Oh, it looks fuzzy," and he tried to pet it.
Oof.
And he had these little teeny, like, they were smaller than hairs, some of them. So trying to pull them with the tweezers, like they would just break, and then they would leave the tiny like little hair bit in.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
Talk about it.
I remember like trying to help in between because like my mom would do it, and my dad would take a turn, and then I'd take a turn. I don't know if my sister helped, but like
learning is fun.
That kind of learning, a little less so. I've certainly done my share of like, let's jump off a cliff and see what happens kind of learning.
Yeah.
Sometimes more literal than.
Yeah, these things happen though. But I mean, that's how I learned what hot was. Mom said, "Don't touch the oven while she's baking bread," and I learned what hot was that day. Sometimes you need the harsh reality of what things are so you truly understand what they are. So.
Well, I mean, so there are some kids that you hear, "Oh, that'll learn them when they did it once." And I was like, maybe for my daughter, but for him, he was I have to do it 7 times to realize that this is a thing that will happen kind of kid.
All right. Honestly, that's exactly what the scientific method is. It's like, well, once doesn't really tell you anything.
Yeah,
Twice
test
is like
and compare.
Statistically somewhat inaccurate still. 7 times though, I know for sure I have solid facts then that I can't run through a wall.
I mean, like, so. I get that. Yeah, he used to be really destructive. We used to call him the plant destroyer.
Oh, okay.
Because if there was a plant nearby, he would tear it into little bits. I don't know why. There's a little bit of a fascination with that.
So maybe it's not just you that kills the plants then?
Well, I mean, there's, like, I'm trying to keep it alive, and there's, I will literally rip you into pieces. There's 2 different things.
Yeah.
Right? But. Yeah.
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're 20 after 4, so I guess the room is no longer ours. Not that it's a huge rush to get out of here. It looks like there's plenty of space for people, but...
All right. Well, if you wanted to kill the recording, we can just chill
Chat?
for it.
Certainly. Let's wrap this up for recording styles.